Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us with this our final Gallery Lecture Series event for the fall 2019 semester. The Gallery Lecture Series events here in 3 West are planned in conjunction with the Haricombe Gallery exhibition, and this fall our exhibition is entitled Strong Foundations, 100 Years of Hispanism at the University of Kansas. And it's celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, as well as several of their many interdisciplinary partners here on the KU campus. This morning we're pleased to welcome Dr. Ignacio Carvajal, Assistant Professor in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and Maragrita Nuñez Arroyo, Graduate Student in the Department of American Studies, and Polo Camacho, Graduate Student in the Department of Philosophy. The presentation this afternoon is Connecting Through Poetry and Prose, and our speakers will be discussing the creative research process and read from their recent works of poetry and prose. Ignacio Carvajal has a PhD in Iberian and Latin American languages and cultures with a portfolio in Native American and Indigenous Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. He also obtained a BA in Spanish and Latin American Studies with the highest distinctions from the University of Kansas, and an AA in Liberal Arts with honors from Johnson County Community College. Dr. Carvajal specializes in interdisciplinary research on Mesoamerican literatures, languages, and cultures, and pedagogical approaches to indigenous language instruction. He's interested in pedagogical instructions and the creation of open access materials for the study of indigenous languages. He's a member of a team of collaborators working on Let's Learn Quiche, an open resource digital repository of language lessons, which are also the base of his Quiche class at KU Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. Ignacio reads and writes poetry. His work has appeared in journals such as the Centos Review, Rio Grande Review, Coal City Review, and several anthologies. His collection, Plegarias, won the first place award in the 2018 poetry contest, Poetic Bridges, by Casa Cultural de las Americas in Houston, Texas. Please welcome Ignacio Carvajal.
I greet you in Quiche, a Mayan language spoken by about 1 million people in the islands of Guatemala, to welcome you and thank you all for taking the time out of your busy days to be here with us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are standing on the ancestral territory of several tribal nations, among them the Ka, the Osage, and the Shawnee peoples, and by recognizing indigenous populations that have been displaced from and to Kansas, along with those that continue to inhabit this land. I'd also like to thank Sarah Guibentil and Kelly Spadin for organizing this event and inviting us, and suggesting themes and ways to organize it. I'm honored to participate today and to introduce 2 graduate students, writers, and thinkers who are engaging in production that creates new knowledge and new ways of considering existing knowledge or events. So each of us will speak, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Though we will each deal with different topics and approaches today, I think we share a common plight as scholars and people, one that I think is probably common to most of us here. The work you'll hear today is of different genres. Margarita will share works on searching, on fear, on understanding the self, which is continuously shaped by what surrounds us, what scares us, what drives us. Polo's philosophical reflections hinges literally on creation, on the ethical implications and the moving forward of our understanding and relationship with life forms, others, and our own. And my contribution will be on verse. But even if they are different, if I may dare make an assumption about my co-presenters' work, and they can correct me if I'm wrong during the Q&A, or as they start their talk, they're going to be like, nah, he's lying, is that it shares a similarity with mine, one that I'm still unraveling every time that I put pen to paper, regardless of genre. In our queries, be they philosophical, narrative, linguistic, poetic, while we search, we also create. We create ourselves as we choose to incorporate center, or dismiss certain ideas and approaches. And I think most importantly, we create community as we gather, like we are gathered here today, to share space and word and learn how to learn and to grow with each other. So I want to thank you all very much for taking the time out of your day to be here. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to two of our speakers today, and I want to introduce you both and then have you give your interventions. Polo Camacho is a PhD candidate in philosophy at the University of Kansas. His main research interests include philosophy of science, philosophy of biology, and bioethics. Under the supervision of Dr. Armin Scholz, his dissertation explores a fundamental principle in biology called the central dogma of molecular biology. Specifically, his dissertation explores whether the dogma is accurate and practical, as well as the ethical implications of a post-dogma biology, where technologies like, and I forgot to ask you how to say the names of these biologies, he'll tell you about the names of the technologies, I'm not even going to try, are challenging our understanding of evolution and development. When he's not doing philosophy, he enjoys powerlifting and writing about food and drink. And Maragrita Nuñez Arroyo is a PhD student in American Studies in the American Studies Department, also here at KU. She received her undergrad degree at the University of Kansas in journalism with minors in dance and creative writing, and she is also a Trio and McNair program alum. Today, Margarita will be reading a piece she wrote in undergrad. This piece is one of her favorites. It is an uncovering of truths and fears she hid from herself. This piece is called On Arm Hair, Mourning, and Other Things. So I want to give y'all, I would ask of y'all to give our speakers and yourselves for being here a round of applause.
All right, so first of all, thank you all for being here. Thanks to the KU libraries, all of you, Dr. Ignacio, Margarita, everybody for just opening up this space for philosophers and for philosophizing. And so I should just say right away, I could read a very long abstract that I recently, that I'm currently working on genetic technology, but I'm not going to do that. I'll leave the oration up to the orators. And instead what I want to do is I was told that this panel was going to be about creative research and creative thinking within our field. And so what I want to do instead is I want to present on creative research in my field of philosophy, namely the philosophy of biology. So that's what I want to do. But stay tuned for excellent poetry. It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. I've seen it. It's mind-blowing. So, okay, the philosophy of biology is a specific field within the philosophy of science. We use biology and biological insights to answer philosophical questions. So this is a lot different from what we typically imagine, right? Philosophers just kind of sitting in an armchair, pontificating about questions about human nature and existence. What we do is we try to look at what the life sciences have to say and to what extent they have a bearing on certain philosophical questions. So for example, there's a dichotomy that exists, that has existed for a really, really, really long time, namely a dichotomy between nature and nurture. For anybody that's taken a class in science, you've seen this play out. If you've taken a psycholinguistics class, a psychology class, a biology class, you've seen this dichotomy between nature and nurture. Up here we have two figureheads in philosophy, René Descartes and John Locke. And this dichotomy figures when they talk about what the mind is and its ability to organize ideas, right? John Locke wants to say, listen, your mind is like a tabula rasa, blank slate, right? Any idea that you have and your ability to organize ideas in your mind are given to you in nature. The world hands you over these ideas and you organize them. In fact, your ability to organize them comes from nature, nurture rather. René Descartes, on the other hand, wants to say, no, your mind comes equipped with these pre-built mechanisms that can organize mind and thought, right? And so this dichotomy is really prolific in the history of philosophy. It actually goes all the way back to Plato and Socrates. So for Plato, our rational minds were able to cleave onto the forms Aristotle, you know, there's that famous image of them, right? Aristotle's pointing outward, Plato's pointing upward. Plato's saying, no, man, it's out there in the world, in nature. Plato's like, no, our minds have to grasp it somehow. Well, let's look at what biology says. This dichotomy figures in the biological sciences when we talk about genes versus the environment. So here we have this like really huge distinction that philosophers tend to cleave onto: nature, nurture. Is the mind a tabula rasa, or do we have these pre-equipped ideas that allow us to organize thought? Well, if we look at what the biological sciences have to say about the distinction, it's not a matter of this versus that. Both play a role in the development of any human being. In fact, if you look at, open up a textbook in biology, what you'll typically find is that when we talk about genetic expression, like, oh, you're this way because your dad was this way, or because your mom was this way, what does that imply? That you have certain genes that you can't change. Well, if you look at the biological sciences, what they actually say is, listen, you don't just have this trait because of genes. A whole lot of stuff has to happen in order for any trait to develop. So it's not a matter of nature versus nurture, genes versus the environment, and maybe perhaps tabula rasa versus a rational mind. Both play a role. It's a question of how do they operate in tandem in order to deliver certain traits. That's Carol Stotz, an extremely influential philosopher of biology who just passed away. Rest in peace. So what we end up with is something like this. Pretty crazy, right? All these little dots, so all these little things are nodes that indicate genes and non-genes. All of these things are working together to talk about certain functions of cancer, for example, right? That's a biological network. So in biology, we've already gone beyond this distinction between nature versus nurture. In fact, we might even say there is no such thing as a distinction, but that would be really strong. But I'll say it, it's fine. Another thing that the philosophy of biology involves is leaving the armchair, right? So when we typically think about philosophers, or actually when I'm about to go to Thanksgiving dinner, coming up here really soon, and I'll probably get the question like, oh, what's your major in? And I'll say something like philosophy, and they'll be like, oh, you just like sit around and like twiddle your thumbs and think about stuff. I say, yes, I do, but that's not the whole story. In fact, the field of philosophy of biology involves leaving the armchair. So philosophers are now leaving this space that was typically thought of as philosophical, and what we're doing is we're actually engaging interdisciplinarily with the sciences, with the arts, with literature. We want to explore different methodologies and different alternatives for understanding ourselves and the world around us. And so philosophy of biology provides a really great way of doing this. So here's Plato and the lazy boy. And this kind of represents what philosophy has looked like for the past really, years and years and years here. And so what I want to talk about is the traditional method, at least in analytic philosophy. This is the way philosophy was practiced for a really, really, really long time, and things are starting to change. The tides are turning, right? It's really easy. This method is called the method of cases, or this is called conceptual analysis. What do? We begin with a question. If you've read any Socratic dialogue, any dialogue involving Socrates and one of his peers, you'll have someone ask a question like, what is happiness? Then someone offers a theory. Happiness is pleasure. And then someone goes, well, wait a minute. If happiness is pleasure, what about this really crazy counterexample I came up with, right? Where the counterexample is something like, okay, so this is an actual counterexample used in philosophy. It's called the experience machine objection. And so what we're supposed to imagine you're hooked up to a machine that's constantly generating pleasure, but you're just kind of like lying there. So if you imagine the Matrix, imagine you're in the Matrix, but you're effectively just lying there and this machine is just pumping you with pleasure. Is that a happy life? And so the way the method of cases works is, where do your intuitions lie, right? Is it your intuition that being hooked up to this machine generates happiness? No? Well, then happiness can't be pleasure. It's got to be something else. This is called the method of cases. And this is a method that's used extensively in analytic epistemology, in the philosophy of the social sciences, in normative ethics. Here's a problem with that method though. And maybe some of you caught on to this. The method of cases and a lot of analytic philosophy ignores the fact that intuitions vary across demographic groups, right? So what was happening, if I might be frank, is that a lot of white guys were like, oh, we all share this intuition. Of course this is the right answer to the question. Let's pursue this theory, or let's pursue that theory. And philosophers like Stephen Stitch were like, wait a minute. I don't think everyone shares these similar intuitions. Let's ask different people about these cases and see what they have to say about it. So there's stories about him going to like a Burger King with surveys and just asking people these questions like, how do you feel about this case? How do you feel about the trolley problem? How do you feel about that? And what he found, and what the tradition of experimental philosophy found, is that people differ with regard to their intuitions about certain cases, like the experience machine. In the case of free will, for example, if you're an extrovert, studies find that you're going to be drawn more to a compatibilism about moral responsibility. The same goes based on gender, race. I mean, just you go on and on and on and on. If you look at intersections, you'll find that if you're a woman who was raised first generation Latin American versus a man that's born somewhere else, your intuitions may differ drastically. So what's happening here is that intuitions aren't necessarily a good way of gauging which theories to go by. And the sad thing is a lot of philosophy is based on this sort of methodology. And we find that people's intuitions differ with the trolley problem. If you see The Good Place, you know what the trolley problem is maybe. And also with the get-here problem in epistemology. And so what do? In philosophy of biology, we leave the armchair. Because biology doesn't care about people's intuitions. It just goes, hey, here's information. How does this weigh in with respect to certain philosophical questions? So one question, which I think dovetails a lot with the theme happening here today, is what is human nature? What does it mean to be human, right? That's a big, big, big question in the history of philosophy. One answer to the question is it means being a rational, cognizing person or thing, right? And so if we use the method of cases, then we'll probably have this exchange. Well, what about this crazy hypothetical scenario? How do you feel about that? Does that mean we're rational beings? Well, as a philosopher of biology, I don't do that. I just look to what the biological science have to say. So that's a pro. 2010 to 2018, rest in peace. What is human nature? Well, since antiquity, a popular view is that human nature involves being a rational, cognizing animal. But the cool thing about biology is that there are a ton of animals that are able to cognize in really, really complicated and sophisticated manners. This crow, for example, I don't know if you noticed, it has a twig that's curved. This Chalcedonian, I think it's a Chalcedonian crow, what it does is it takes twigs and it's able to twist them. And what it does is it sticks its beak, or the twig, inside holes, and it's able to fish out animals, and it's able to fish out its food. Not only that, but it's able to teach its young how to do this. And there's evidence of sort of social learning among Chalcedonian crows, and actually a bunch of other animals. Beavers. What other ones are there? Chimpanzees. So there's social learning happening in the animal world, and there's also cognition happening in the animal world. So what do we do with this popular philosophical response? Well, we say, we can't single ourselves out as unique, right? Which is significant because a lot of Western philosophy does this, right? A lot of Western philosophy says, listen, we're different from other things. We're maybe perhaps higher than other organisms or life forms. But if we look at what the biological sciences have to say, we're not all that different from other animals, right? So maybe there's really no grounds biologically for situating ourselves as maybe more elevated or more significant than other creatures. So that's interesting. And so what my work does is I look at how the biological sciences, as I've already mentioned, we go beyond the armchair. We have to think creatively in the philosophy of biology. We can't just rely on intuitions. We have to go out and we have to engage with other sciences. We have to engage with other fields, with other disciplines in order to answer certain philosophical questions. And sometimes, as you saw, these philosophical questions dissipate. This distinction between nature and nurture, it may be that when we investigate what the sciences have to say, that there is no such distinction, right? Or when we're thinking about human nature, and how distinct it is from other kinds of nature, maybe it isn't so different either, right? And so that's really what my work looks at. I don't know if I'm over time or not, or if I'm. So that's it. Yeah, so that's my presentation. Thank you so much for having me. I'm done. My work looks at genetic technologies. So for example, has anybody heard of CRISPR-Cas9, the CRISPR-Cas9 technology? Okay. So recently that was used, and if any biologists are here, correct me if I'm wrong, this genetic technology was used to alter embryonic cells, or embryonic cells, and to create what are called CRISPR babies. So genetically modified before they're even born babies. It was used to do this. And so what I do is I've been looking at this technology, and I've been sort of looking at the implications of it. What they're doing essentially is kind of twiddling around with your DNA and then just kind of going, oh, what happens if we take this gene out? What happens if we take this one out? It's not, obviously, it's not just that, right? And I think with the CRISPR babies, what was done with that technology is they were trying to see if they could make them HIV resistant. But this opens up a question, right? Do we want to live in a world where we're manipulating embryonic cells, right? Is that something that we should pursue? Can we trust that people are going to use this technology responsibly? What sort of, or another question is this technology all that different from previous technologies like IVF and other forms of genetic manipulation? But yeah, that's what CRISPR is. Just CRISPR-Cas9. Cool. Do I take questions now, or?
We'll do questions at the end?
Yeah,
or,
let's do
yeah, we'll do questions at the end. Yeah, Margarita.
Okay. I'm a little small, but does everyone see me here? So I don't have a PowerPoint. I guess I'll start with actually what I researched, since I didn't put that in my introduction. So I'm an American Studies PhD student. Right now, I think my focuses are on dance, connecting to capitalism, and I also do hauntings, trauma and testimonial, yeah, a lot of those things. But it's, when I have a more clear, I will say. So writing, I've been writing since I was probably in elementary, I don't know, very young. I remember that my dad once said that my parents were saying, like, we knew you were a writer when we got into a car accident, and the next day you were reading a poem to us about the car accident, and I was like, oh, yeah. So I'm not gonna read when I write, I usually like, I like to hear music. Usually it's very instrumental, sad music. My mom hates that. She's like, ¿por qué siempre escuchas música triste? But I don't know, it just helps me like get into a place where I can actually commit myself to immersing myself into a space that only I'm occupying. I'm very quiet. I was very quiet growing up, so it was a form that I got to speak. And today, I feel like writing has been a form of self-healing. So being your own self-curandera, trying to understand things that you don't understand, especially when your family in the States operates in silence. If they operate in silence, how do you really understand things that aren't spoken? How do you uncover all these things, all this trauma? So this first piece I'm gonna read is called On Arm, Hair, Mourning, and Other Things. This one is mostly about uncovering things about me, and then I'll read another one that's different. But this one was very hard for me to write, and I will start now. Okay. I look down at my arm hair, and there it is, a bit fuzzy, not that noticeable, but it is still there. I didn't realize how lucky I was to still have these strands of hair on my arm until I came to college. I began to talk to other Latinx women, and many of them mourned their arm hair. They mourned the security and comfort it had once provided. My arm hair got lucky. My arm hair is light. It isn't dark. It doesn't stand out, insinuating its form and territory over my body. My arm hair blends in the way my light skin allows me to. In other words, my arm hair is safe. That is why I still have it, because it offers protection. Black arm hair would not offer safety to my body. I've heard stories of how they bleached their arm hair. Many of them still wanted to keep it even when they heard the harsh words of existence from their mothers. So instead of getting rid of it, they tried to change it, to mold it into something more tolerable. But in the end, it really wasn't their arm hair anymore. I don't mourn my arm hair, but I mourn my hair. I remember my mother telling me that when I grew older, I should get highlights. She said it would look pretty on me, that I would look like all the other white girls. That I would look like all the other white girls. I even thought I really wanted that. The first time I dyed my hair, it was supposed to make me look like Molly Ringwald from Pretty in Pink. It didn't. I mean, the color was there, but I was still there too. I hadn't scrubbed myself out. I would later learn that scrubbing myself out wasn't possible. I remember that when I looked into the mirror, my cheeks were too puffy. I didn't look like Molly. I needed to look wider. I needed to be slimmer. I needed to be taller. I needed to have skin that wasn't mine. Maybe if I wasn't brown, it could be okay to read too much and to feel so different. Molly was allowed to be different, I thought. It would make it less confusing to be in the skin with my accent. I wanted to be pretty, and at that time, I felt that I couldn't be pretty as a brown girl, and I tried to mold myself into something different. I tried to become a hybrid. I would have to learn that no matter how much my hair changed, I would always want something more. Every time things got confusing, I went to hair dye. I changed a bit of myself, believing I would feel better. I believed it would make me feel new, but it didn't. It seemed I would once again mess up. Hair dye became therapeutic. If you don't like a part about yourself, you change it. You burn it, you cut it, you kill it. I no longer know what my hair true color is. I have an idea. I remember they all said I had dirty blonde hair. I remember it was long and softer than what it is today. I should have loved it more. I should have loved myself more. I should have cared for it. Instead, today I mourn it and feel shame for dissecting it until nothing was left. Now that you know that many of us mourn the hair we were born and grew up in, it's crazy to sometimes look at your arms and cry because it is still there. Because after all the cutting and dissecting, your being is still there. It remains in small strands of hair that stand up when a sudden cold wind hits you. I also mourn the happiness and authority many of us had on our bodies. This was before we learned how the world would view our bodies, always leaned to and gaped at like J-Lo. Books also bring mourning. Books were thought to contain us, and they did. They contained us in handcuffs without the liberty to move or live. I remember reading books where I identified with the protagonist. She was overcoming beauty standards. She was weird, artistic, and anything she wanted to be. She was also white. Most of the time, that such important fact, I chose to fade it into the background. I chose to reimagine the character and to think that she was brown. I chose to exist in those books. I was timid. I was quiet at my discretion. I was a nerd, but most of all, I feared the parameters of my body. I couldn't talk back to my elders. I couldn't dance too vividly because that would cause men to become uncontrolled. Little brown girls must learn that the harm that is done to their bodies would always be their fault. They must learn to reduce their body as well as ignore the stares of uncles who cannot contain themselves. You are taught you shouldn't have too much power, and when you do, eres una loca. Don't dance like that, they'll tell you. Don't sit like that. Don't ever wear a tampon. If you do, you're no longer a virgin. Don't read too much. Men don't like that. Don't eat too much or you'll get fat, but eat enough that you won't look skinny. Don't talk about periods. Men find that gross. Don't ever get on the pills, that is disrespectful. So you slowly become la loca. They notice you read too much, and they tell you in the time you read that novel, you could have cleaned the house. You could have swept, mopped, and vacuumed. They shake their heads in disapproval when you pull out your bag of tampons during swimming season. They nod in approval when you lose weight, but as it keeps coming off, they state you need to eat more. You learn to hate food. You don't trust food. You love soccer, the intense force it takes to hold your arms close as you run and dive for the ball. As you run, the wind moves through your hair and under your shirt. You like being fast, competing with all the boys. Your tacos slide onto the wet grass, and you're down with a thump. Yet, there is glory. You stole the ball. You're a girl who loves soccer. You're the girl who stole the soccer ball from Alex. He's the best player on your block. From then on, you two would share secret stares. You'd play and gently touch one another as you scrambled for the ball. He'd sit on the grass out of breath and look at you. You felt true when he looked at you. He didn't think you were weird for reading too much. He liked how aggressive you were on the field. He liked the way you always got up after every hit you received from others. You both knew boys didn't like to play with girls, but you didn't care. Your mother hated how much you played soccer. You'd come with bruises all over your legs, ribs, thighs, and any body parts that was out in the open. Your knees became bruised like mangoes all the time. Your hands were full of calluses from the many times you fell onto the concrete floor when you weren't allowed to play in the grass. You lost all your hair ties because they became the goalposts for the many soccer games you played. You thought he liked you. He looked at you as if you had become the melody to his fast feet movement in the game. He dated your best friend. You smiled and you said you were happy for them. He still looked at you. He still bumped into you and lingered his hand across yours as you both fought for the ball. His cousin Checho saw it. Your cousin Josue saw it. Then you became the goalkeeper. You don't remember when you stopped playing soccer. It was once all you thought about, and then one day, your soccer shoes moved to the back of your closet. I must say I mourned those days. I mourned the green and purple-looking mango bruises my body carried. I mourned Alex and the looks that made me become mush. I mourned the desperation I felt to run. I mourned the crouching of my legs as my eyes followed the ball. I mourned the pain of falling into the concrete floor as small rocks stuck to my hand as I bled. I mourned all the last hairbands that I never used. I am a loca, I am a writer, I am a survivor. I don't get to say I mourn my arm hair. I stare down my arm and it is still there. Yet I mourn little Maggie. I mourn the girl that hadn't yet been touched by the man with the greedy eyes. I mourn the girl who thought her hair was not beauty. I mourn the girl who was convinced she'd play with the men's Mexico national soccer team. I mourn the girl who never felt the need to shred her skin to feel something. I mourn the girl who had 1 month of happiness when she met her grandparents. I mourn the girl who had never had to convince herself that she was skinny. I mourn the girl who enjoyed food. I mourn her crooked teeth and imperfect smiles. I hold on to today and hope that soon I'll remember. I hope soon I'll remember what color is my hair. Thank you for that. 3 minutes, okay. Okay, well, we'll just do another essay, because that's what mainly I do. This one's was hard to write. We'll go. Pájaro enjaulado. Pájaro. Pájaros son de pequeño tamaño, aunque existen excepciones y poseen una serie de particularidades que los vuelve aptos para la vida, pese a su tamaño y a su nula fuerza física. I cannot say I fully grasp what is happening around me, but I can say that I feel it. Lo siento como una quemadura que no se calma. I want to tell her that she has nothing to fear, that everything will be okay, pero no puedo. I want to tell her that this country loves her with everything she is, con su acento, piel de color cafecito y pelo negro. We're all scared. We are counting the days, hoping that they won't start in a new country that isn't the U.S. She is small, a height that this country considers not the average. yet she is okay not being grouped in with the average. She gave up blending in a long time ago. Her job is not to blend in, it is to survive. En este país no es posible vivir en libertad si eres indocumentado. Vives como un pájaro enjaulado. Nadie debería vivir así. Yet that is how people live because of their version of the American dream. Los pájaros deberían volar. I often wonder to myself if the American dream is what they live, because the so-called dreams sounded different in my history class. If you work hard, you can be whatever you want. They never told us that some of us were not meant to. I mean, if they were honest, they would have told us that many of us were not expected to go to college. They would have told us that it wasn't about giving it our best, but about giving it our best and being able to struggle and overcome the system that would constantly try to tear us down. History class for some people is not a place of truth, but instead a place of convenient alternative facts. Alien, a resident born in or belonging to another country who has not acquired citizenship by naturalization, a foreigner, a person who has been estranged or excluded. The term alien, even now, it's hard to say or see movies about them. We have grown up in an era of technology and mass media coming from every direction. I saw a movie about aliens as in the entities we describe, imagine, and predict that exist outside of our planet before I ever heard the word in a context to identify me or other immigrants. Alien, it sounds like someone I've never seen, like a distant being that is not me. Pero no. Si un estadounidense blanco fuera a México y la llamáramos extraterrestre, nunca nos la acabaríamos. Pero no, nosotros sí podemos ser aliens. I don't tell her she'll be okay. Yo no quiero mentir, ni llenar su mente de esperanzas. I tell her that it's tough. I tell her that there's a great chance she won't be okay. I want to tell her that she shouldn't go to school for a while, because they could find her easier. I want to tell her to stay indoors and hide, yet I don't. Ella no es un ratón. I've encouraged her to keep studying. It is what makes her feel free in this country. Es todo lo que tiene. I want to tell her not to drive, but I don't. I look at her and know they have taken so much of her. She cannot lose the self-authority over her being. She has to keep something of herself. El pájaro tiene que seguir cantando en su jaula. Es su forma de libertad. I've already begun to imagine my life without her. It wouldn't feel like life. It would feel empty and pointless. If she's not here, everything goes to waste. The constant tears and guilt for not attending her father's funeral, the impotence for never being able to take flowers to his tombstone, the sadness of knowing her mother is withering away as she lies in another country, worlds apart, where shoes are not a luxury. If they got her, she would wither away over there, sola y sin el país que la dejó soñar pero nunca la reconoció. Ratón. Un ratón es un animal que pertenece al grupo de los mamíferos. Se trata de un roedor que mide unos 20 centímetros y se caracteriza por su pelo gris y su cola de gran longitud. El ratón es muy parecido a la rata, otro roedor. Ambas especies forman parte de la misma subfamilia y de la misma familia. It feels surreal. It feels like the books that I've read that always seem distant to me, yet it's not so far in stretch. He told me that it's going to get worse. He told me that we're all stuck and powerless. Nos hemos convertido en ratones, he said. We are stuck in a room waiting to be picked one by one. Some of us will be lucky and never see the light, yet some of us will escape the dark shadows and be known as one of the mass number of deportation. For those who stay, I wonder if they will ever not feel like ratones. I wonder if they will be able to one day leave the dark rooms and walk without fear in public. I wonder if one day people will see their worth and contributions. We are not rodents. Maybe one day we will not be treated like them either. Enjaulado. Poner una persona o animal en una jaula o meter una persona en la cárcel. I won't say her name. You're not allowed to hear it. She, like the many others, is forced to erase it. They have constantly butchered it, cut it into small pieces, and taken it away. They have given it a different sound, one that is for them and never meant for her. I also won't tell you her name because it's not safe. It never was. But now nevermore, it is not safe. I'll tell you that she hates loose shirts. She says that they make her look fat. Her favorite dish is mole. She has beautiful brown skin that she tries to reject. She has a voice that is the perfect tone that reminds you of home. She has hands that look old because of the hard work and constant burns. She bakes flan not because she enjoys it, but because her loved ones love the dessert. She always criticizes the way I fold my clothes. She rarely smiles, so when she does, you know she means it. She hates her name. She doesn't wear white nail polish because she fears it'll make her skin seem darker. She only had the opportunity to study until the 4th grade. She acts like she's okay, but she's scared. Thank you.
I seem to have misplaced the book I was going to read. That's good. That's not ideal. I thought I might have left it up here, but I don't see it. Sorry about that.
Thank you both, Polo and Margarita. I'm going to read some poems and then we can open it up to questions. Plegarias is a bilingual collection, so there's some Spanish and there's some English in here. I'll read mostly in English, but this first one is in Spanish. Plegaria número 1. Dame, Padre, la sensatez para callar los nombres que conozco, las calles que he recorrido, la gente a la que le caigo bien. Cuando llegue la hora de compartir palabra, dame la brevedad, la sutileza, recibo las palmas o las piedras. Plegaria number 2. Grant me, I beg of you, the benefit of the doubt, the certainty and fear that the flesh can more than the golden marble of the mind. Behold, the earthly spheres, the toil and pay, the hunt and kill, the moist flesh, the hot air. Welcome the thirst that burns like a million matches. Greet the burning pyre. Be grateful for the night that comes too quick and lures you from your cage to your desires. Do praise the gods of want, the ones who ask the most of you. Place, if not more, one red candle upon the rock for them. They are eager, waiting. We must feed them just as we feed ourselves. This body of yours, it will be dust. The name given to you, unreplicated. The tongue within your mouth and all its choices will live a prosperous life even among the ashes. Proclaim there is celestial traces in these bones. Grant the forces that be their great erosion. From the hearth of this world our coals are crashing, making from the black crumbles a whole new fire. Burn then, my dear, burn bright and happy. Let light and love and gods come through your window. If we're to wake without fail every bleak morning, let's step at least with might onto the sidewalks. Let ring across the fields that we have been here. Our names, let them be etched along the arrow that flies with time, quickens, and seeks. Blessed be, in the end, the realizations, the patience, and the work of our frail hands. Awake here in this day, like lords and warriors, let fingers twist around the neck of fear. Plegaria number 5. There are things in this world that, against our better judgment and intentions, become inevitable. The wolf will lick the blade in the ground. The bird will eat the cigarette butt, push its chick out of the nest, whether it flies or... We will take the happy pill, break down, recede into our cave, or sit at the table con los ladrones. We'll kick and bite, we'll punch, regret. Our lungs and guts know about the hardness of our choices. May we never cease to be reminded that though there is a love poison, there is also in this whirlwind of a world a love remedy. How are we doing? We okay? A couple of more? She's asleep back there. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. This is Plegaria number 8. It has 3 parts. 1. Blessed is the one who fights the good battle, the one who stumbles but does not fall. Blessed are you, brothers and sisters of mine, for treading unafraid among this kingdom of dust. I have seen the whirlwinds of this world. They've come vicious, furiously, twisted me around on their great clouds. I have seen, too, the depths of my insides. How easy to drown in ourselves. There must be at all times maintained a mightiness, the knowledge of our mind and of our body, the undeniable physical proof of our consistency. Move forward with the days and with their hours. We have no time to waste. It ever latents. It ever runs from the grasp of our fingertips, that one grace of flesh, that holy sight. Keep your eyes open. They were meant to see what lies ahead. What lies elsewhere is merely parenthetical. There are objects to be seized, words to be spoken. In the burning center of community, there is a God of sorts, a moving force, a field of drops of rain, of water that hits the stone at some precise angle. It is a heavy burden to be sedentary, but water that moves for always, move for always. And so, I have one more. I'll speak a little bit about our topic for today, which is creative research. And I think generally I've had some inkling that you should keep your creative work separate from your research work. And I think that a lot of us along the way, whether we write creatively or write as journalists or write as scientists or write as anything else, or we are given assignments in school, etc., we think that there's only one way of doing it. And so if I spoke to the way that creative writing has influenced my research, it has done so at a language level, definitely. And so I'm very thankful to have had the opportunity to study many languages and be here in a new land, right, that has a new language that has also become part of the tools that I have to express not just myself, but the ideas that I'm producing, and also to work with indigenous languages. And so I've studied Quiché for 8 years now, and I've had the opportunity to teach it, and it's a fascinating process to see the ways that language really makes the world around us. And so I'm happy to talk individually about that afterwards or during the Q&A. I don't want to belabor it too much, but there are ways in which those languages influence the way that I think inevitably. So I'll do 2 more. I have a couple of minutes, right? I'll do 2 more. And so this one of them is mainly in Spanish and the other one's mainly in English. Plegaria número 14. Todo es un abrir y cerrar de tierra, una caída larga, apaciguante. Despertamos en los brazos de una madre grande, de una madre uleu, de una madre tiempo, que a veces es despiadada, tan despiadada como amable ha sido cuando nos ha buscado el gozo, la comida, el amor escondido entre la milpa, la respuesta terrible, el agua. En la mañana tiene la boca abierta, espera que caigamos para masticarnos, para triturar nuestro dolor y nuestros huesos, la piedra más grande, la piedad más grande, la piedra más negra, lenímalo oval. Este Amat es una cadena interminable de volcanes. Se sacude con el Keprakan y hasta las nubes tiemblan, con el susurro de lluvia, de cosecha promesa, de ulf inesperado, de miedo y de semilla. Bendita la interminable labor del condenado al calvario paraíso de este mundo, bendito el gozo refulgente de los hijos, el pavor fulminante de su muerte, bendito el alcohol y el balance, Kutij le tzan le ak, kutij le hombre, kutijó, todo se come, todo sabe algo y se ingiere. Bendita el hambre, bendita la sed, bendita las ganas de plantarnos y esparcirnos, de existir en el ciclo eterno de la vida por un pequeño instante. Bendita la llama que podamos ser, bendita nuestra cosecha, la cosecha que somos, bendita la divina garganta que ha de tragarnos, bendito el Mantioshnik que pronuncie, bendito el momento en que los dioses digan Mantiosh Chekawá y seamos nosotros. Después de haber vivido y sufrido, después de haber llorado y clamado, después de haber visto nuestra carne y la carne del prójimo arder en el deseo y el dolor, en el terror y el gozo, después de haber cumplido con las faenas otorgadas, los que nos asentemos en su estómago y le quitemos el hambre, Mantiosh Chekawá, Echa, Mantiosh Chekawá. And Mantiosh Chekawá is what you say when you sit down to eat at the table in Quiche. It means thanks for our food, thank you for our food. And I'll finish with this one. Legaria number 15. In the tongue of my fathers and my mothers was a fire twisting, a hawk soaring, a patience perennial like no patience of mine. In the arms of my fathers and my mothers were we dirty-faced children of the mountain, we indestructible flesh, we eager eyes. In the tongue of my fathers and my mothers was a fire roaring uncontrollable. I can never forget what my words are made of. Since birth, I've been chewing them down into more benevolent bullets. Yo y mi casa serviremos al Señor. Countless living rooms with those words bordadas and framed, a little happy blue house with 2 windows. Whose house is this? Our house. I said, whose house is this? Yo no tengo señor ni maestro. Whose house? In my house, yo y mi casa are going to look after our own. On the tongue of my fathers and my mothers was a warning. They knew we'd been a flock from the beginning, from birth, from sea, from rising sun. Wings need not an ark to beat the tempest. In the tongue of my fathers and my mothers, caigan en cuenta, hermanos, nadie es profeta en su propia tierra. Por eso nos encontramos en estos rumbos ajenos. Por eso nuestra lengua es acróbata y justiciera. Sobre los hombros llevamos a los nuestros, a los de ayer y a los de mañana, a los de hoy. Por desgracia, se les han olvidado muchas cosas. El polvo sobre los pisos de madera, las fogatas, en la arena y las montañas. Sobre todo las montañas, porque sobre todo somos andinistas. Moiséses perdidos en busca de mandamientos. Somos peregrinos y el monte siempre llama. Nadie es profeta en su tierra, pero caigan en cuenta, hermanas, de que en esta tierra los que tengan ojos van a vernos y los que tengan oídos van a oírnos. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, so that was really just beautiful, like great quality, guys. Just opening it up for questions. Does anyone have questions?
Questions, comments, concerns, complaints? Do you want to maybe sit up here as we answer? We got to answer to the people now. And so, take a moment then, as you think of what you want to ask, to turn to the person to your left or to your right and say, hello, hi, my name is this, I study this, I'm a student of that, right? So we've come here, we're here with each other, we might as well meet each other, and that way you can get your nerves down from asking people. Are y'all here from a class? Did a class send you? Who sent you? Jimena sent you? You're getting extra credit? Woo! Look at our work. Giving people extra credit. But seriously, take a second, say hello to the person next to you, and think if you want to make a comment or ask a question. Take 30 seconds to say hello. You can do it. All right, you made a friend, you met a person, you have questions, comments, concerns.
We got answers. Maybe.
So Polo, I love the presentation. It's so mostly like
past 9.
Yeah, I saw a documentary on Netflix, and I don't know if it's the same one, if you've seen that, in which like this DNA manipulation now is being done by like common people like us. They can do it. I don't know if you've seen this.
No, but it does sort of point to the idea that, I mean, we're exposing our bodies and therefore our cells and therefore our genes to environmental factors all the time. So it wouldn't surprise me if, say, so for example, there's a kind of, not to get too nerdy, okay, I'll take it there. There's a nematode that if you expose to certain chemicals, it acquires a trait that is passed on for like 3 or 4 generations. And so this is just an exposure to some chemical, right, that alters the genes in a way that makes a certain trait heritable. And so this is sort of indicative of a kind of extra genetic inheritance. And so like there now people speculating about epigenetic inheritance, trauma for example. People are researching how trauma can be inherited, or how maybe if trauma in previous generations, if I had an ancestor that was maybe suffered some trauma, how maybe perhaps some psychological traits might be passed on over time. But yeah, I think that's certainly
Yes. So so this documentary was like this person who is from Oakland, and he wants everyone to have access to being able to change their DNA. So he was actually injecting in some DNA change to get muscle, something like that. I don't know if you've seen it. So it's on Netflix. I forgot the name, but it's very. I think they mentioned the documentary. So
I'd love to get that information.
yeah, I'll try to get that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great.
They also have this contraption here. So if you want to ask a question or say a comment, you can actually get this microphone thrown at you like this. So, does anybody want to say something? I got a pretty good arm for the people back there. It's a microphone. Can you believe that? Nobody has anything else to say? Yes, take the microphone. I'm going to throw it at you. There you go.
I'm just wondering, as with all 3 of you as academics, if your academic work, approaching it from a creative side of yourselves, if that allows you to dive deeper into your subjects, or do you know, since that's what you've always done, you may not know, but do you feel like it allows you to do that?
Do you have something to say about that?
Sure.
I think there's this right here too.
Yeah, how about this?
Here, you can take this. I'm bragging about this.
Okay. Well, okay, so I'm in American Studies, which is very interdisciplinary, and I have to remain myself to do the work that I do. So myself is, I'm trying to be an academic, and it's, like one of my main goals is, if I'm going to go into this field, I want this to be what I produce or what I do. I want it to be available to my communities, and so I'm really trying to do my academic work that is in a way that people who do not have the access to institutions like this can consume it and can understand it, because that's very important to me. So as I'm working with my mentors, when I go into my dissertation, it's very much gonna have, the theory and everything else, but it's very much also going to be creative, and I'm getting a lot of support in that. I don't know if that answers the question.
Check.
Oh, all right.
So I think that it's nice being able to see that, at least in my own field, that there are certain ways of doing things that can be challenged. And so I find that when I explore alternative research strategies for, say, a question that I'm working on, it's nice to see that this idea or principle or way of analyzing things can in a way be sort of taken down from its pedestal and maybe replaced or supplemented with some other research strategy. So, I mean, I look at the biological sciences, and so, I mean, as a kid, just to kind of get personal, I went to a school that had very sort of strict ways of teaching biology. So, for example, very little was said about Darwin, very little was said about natural selection, so I didn't have a lot of access to that information growing up. And so a lot of explanations in my community were just chalked up to, well, it's just a higher being made it so, right? And so when I went into college, I started researching, looking at biology, and got into grad school. And what was really interesting is that there was sort of a space for me to explore something that was sort of lacking from the time I was really young. And so I could just sort of dive in to that sort of full throttle and not only explore this thing that I haven't ever really given a chance to, but also use it in my own field of research. So I think it's beneficial in a number of ways for me. I'm able to explore things I've never been able to explore. So like, I can see what social scientists have to say, I can see what poets have to say, I can see what, I can kind of engage with them interdisciplinarily and kind of play a little bit. So on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I'm able to be like, there may not be this privileged strategy for going about answering questions. Maybe the way philosophers have been answering a particular question has been confused, and we need to pursue other strategies, and that's okay. So that's another way that I think I've benefited from alternative research, sort of strategies and stuff.
I have a question.
Thank you for your presentations. I wanted to see if each of you talk a little more about your writing process, because it's very different, all the things you're doing, how you engage, where do you find inspiration, why one medium speaks better to you than others.
I can say something about that. So how many of us are undergraduate students? And how many of us are graduate students? Okay, great. So one thing that I've been learning a lot about writing is that when you're working on bigger projects, there's a lot of things that get mixed in, and I think this sort of speaks to the first question that you asked too. So you have expectations on completing the thing, the expectations on what the thing should look like, and most of the time what we have are the expectations. When we're in undergrad and in grad school, we get presented with these finished writing projects that are earth-shattering in our fields, and they say, we're going to start thinking about something in this way, you know what I mean? And a lot of the time the craft that goes behind them is invisible, right? Because it's a finished product and it's a product of authority, and you read and it's published in a reputable source, etc. But I think more and more the way that what I'm discovering is that process of writing that's like a very long one, especially, but also a very communal one. At least I think for things that are very good, they're communal. So there's a lot of people reading it, and a lot of people giving suggestions and that type of stuff. And for me personally, I think it's applicable to both things. For academic writing, you have to do it every day. You have to do it very often. You have to do it continuously, or else you forget what you're doing, or you just have too much negative feelings attached to it, and you have to come back to this thing that seems unsurmountable. So I've learned a lot about chunking things out and being like, I'm going to work on this, because every little aspect of a research project that you have can take you down a rabbit hole that's eternal. So if you're writing a dissertation, you go down these paths, and so even if you're feeling good about it, you can go down a path and be like, oh, but I got to cite what such and such said in 1953 for it. You need to cite the thing that the person said in 1977 to make sense, right? And so I think that to chunk things out is a process. And the last thing I'll say is Mary Oliver, may she rest in peace also, if you don't know who Mary Oliver is, you should go check out a book by Mary Oliver. We have her in the library. amazing poet. She used to say that inspiration isn't this magical thing. You have to show up to meet it every day, and so that it's work. You know what I mean? So sometimes you show up. If you don't show up consistently, it won't know that you're there to be there. Basically, it's a butchering of her book on writing, but yes, that's what I'd say about that.
Okay. Well, I think one of the big things is to write consistently. I know since grad school, I have not been writing creatively consistently, which affects what I can produce. It's just also hard to be in grad school and still like keep that other side of you to write. So the form that I like essays. A lot of people hate essays. Like there's this metaphor that an essay is like the tissue paper with the tissue paper with mucus that falls out of your purse and eventually you don't want to pick up because people like poetry and poetry's great. I like writing poetry too, but I just really fell in love with essays. And as you heard, like essays can be constructed in very different ways. So like even the way that like you position the words can create the illusions of being constricted, being policed, liberty. So all these things are very much so like essays are very much crafted in the way that they're done, and I just find it like amazing, and I love essays, as you can hear me saying this. So I would say trying to write every day has been something, and I have to write on paper. Like I then try to transfer it to my computer or to print it out, but the only way that I'm able to write is with pen and paper. I can't, like starting from a computer seems very unnatural to me, that I tense up like I am now just thinking about it. And I know people have, that's just my method for people with different methodologies. I know people say like, go get like this like really fancy pen. In the end, I don't do the fancy pens, they're too fancy and I feel like I'm gonna do this, so. But I think, I guess I try to do it every day, and it's come to the point that like grad school has been really hard to do my writing aside, so I even bought like 500 word prompts or something to at least get me to write something, because like Ignacio said, it's a craft you have to work on every day. It doesn't just come off one day. And the music, instead of the word.
So my process sort of mirrors how I feel about, surprise, surprise, genes and genetic expression. So when I write a paper and I have my name attached to it, it's sort of, I feel a bit dishonest putting my name on it, because what produced that ultimately were a host of different factors, a host of different conversations that were had between me and other colleagues, me and other people in different departments. The piece of work represents a conversation that I had in the office with someone that isn't even in my discipline. It represents a night, at the burger stand where I'm arguing passionately with another philosopher over something. And so it's like, I feel a bit dishonest putting my name on the paper, because I'm like, well, this wasn't just me. This was a conversation. This was me going to someone's talk and then maybe afterwards chatting with them about their research. This is me, I saw something on TV or on Netflix that made me go online and made me research something that then brought forth this consideration I never thought before. So for me, it's sort of a bunch of factors go into producing the work. And so I agree with Ignacio in that, you see the product, right? It's like the finished work. And the assumption is this work flowed from the person's brain, like it's some sort of genius, but that's rarely, if ever, the case, right? For me, it's like a paper represents a bunch of conversations that were had, a bunch of talks I went to, not just the papers that I read, not just my time in graduate school, but a bundle of things. And that being said, that's not to say genes aren't important to genetic expression. You have to cultivate the skill of writing. You have to write all the time. That skill has to be there. But to say that it's the only thing, you know, again, going back to what Ignacio said, it's a lot of things going into it. The writing is one thing, but it's like research can take on many forms. It can be conversations. So that's usually what I live by. And that influences me in the sense that I'm like, okay, I've been staring at the screen too much, you know? Like, I need to just walk around a little bit, maybe open up my mind, talk to some friends, you know, other colleagues and stuff, and that, so yeah.
You have to catch the box.
Thank you. It's really interesting. Just coming at things from different angles, and I really like that. I was just wondering how you all got into your fields of study, and where you'd like to take it in, say, 10 years' time, or whatever.
That's that. I got a microphone, but I can't catch. Let's see. I've always loved literature. I've always written poetry, and so it's weird because thinking about land, I'm thinking about land a lot and how the things that we write and produce, whether they're creative work or research or academic work, matters so much where it's coming from, right? And that we recognize those dynamics and the fact that it allows us to. So I'm an immigrant to this country. I came to this country because my father came to study at KU, right? And so I remember this. And then I did my graduate work in Texas. And I always tell people, oh, I'm from Costa Rica. And then I moved to Kansas. And they were like, why? Right? Because Kansas has this bad rep. Of course, we that live here know that it's a beautiful place. But anyway, I got sidetracked. It was very random, and it had to do with all these things. When I arrived at Austin, I was doing my PhD. I had no idea what I wanted to focus on, and I started studying Quiche, and it completely shifted everything because I started getting into the colonial period, which is what I wrote my dissertation on. I started studying Quiche, which is at the heart of my research, both for like academic purposes and teaching purposes. Yeah, it's contradictory in the sense that very displaced from the places from where this language and this culture resides, and through an institution of higher learning like the university, I was given an opportunity that a lot of people whose language it is or who belong to the communities that the language and culture belongs to don't have. And I've been given, opportunities and credit for learning this language that a lot of people who are bilingual or trilingual in their communities don't get celebrated, or rather put down, right? So I think that all these contradictions drive, in a sense, that pursuit for making things making sense of what it is that you can produce and how what you produce affects the land, comes from the land and the people that are around you and others. So I hope that's clear. And then the other thing, in 10 years, I don't know, I'm trying to get tenure. This is my first semester here. So talk to me in 5 years. Hopefully I'll be an associate professor at KU. But yes, how about you? I have your microphone.
So I got a degree in journalism. Initially I came to KU for education, for English, because I didn't know that there was a difference between an English major and an English major to the education school. I'm first generation, so I'm looking for my family to come to college. I always knew that I wanted to come, but I didn't really think I would come. Like, I remember watching TV and seeing like college shows on TV, and I was like, I want to go there. But the actual notion of being here was never something that I thought would happen, because no one in my family had done it. And so there's a lot of things that I didn't know coming into school, such as English major is different to English major educations. I've always liked writing, and so I eventually transitioned to journalism but it seemed like the work that I wanted to be doing, I couldn't really do it here in the journalism school, and I ended up being a McNair scholar, and my current mentor, Christopher Peña, had just arrived to the campus, and he is also an alum from McNair, and so he went to the McNair office and said, if there are any students that you have that want to work or do this work, I'm willing to mentor them. Mulu, the director of the McNair program, then told me there's this professor who's doing this work, and you should meet up for coffee and see if you can work. We met up. He's currently still my mentor. He has really helped me get to where I am today. I think he, after I completed my bachelor's, I went straight into a PhD, which is still very frightening. And I know that at the moment that I applied to like 12 PhD programs. But I know that I was probably not the most competitive person, not having a master's and all these things. But I know that at least my mentor knows that I might not be the most competitive person at that time, but that with work and with doing all my studies, I can become a more competitive person. I can become a more round-minded scholar who not only he believes in me, which I didn't believe in myself at the time, and was like, PhD is not for me. And I think part of it is not only doing well academically, becoming a competitive person, but like Ignacio was saying, it's like also understanding like our own privilege. So you've heard me speak about Spanish and these things, but like I've also really been, so I'm in Ignacio's class for Keisha, and so I learn a lot and really learning about why my family like left Mexico, and what that means to like what's going on there, like how Spanish is used as a language to silence other languages, and what does that have to do, and what is my role in this, and not even what with knowing this knowledge, how will I then construct my research, and how will I try not to further commit violence that has been committed to all these individuals, and also trying to understand like trauma that like family members have undergone, that people in my community still undergo, and how that violence then is reenacted to more violence. And so there's an understanding of like being a competitive person, but also I think part of my journey is like understanding my family, myself, my community, and trying to offer a way to offer a form of healing, because I think that's really important when, okay, I'm just gonna stop there, I'm gonna go to a bigger rant, but I'm here, and in the future, I would like to be a professor. I would like to not go to California, not because I don't want to go there, I grew up there, but I feel like that is the concentration of a lot of work that's being done, which is like phenomenal and great, but at least when I moved to Kansas, I felt like I didn't know who to go to. I felt like there was no one out here that looked like me, and I think there are so many students here who need to see people who look like them, and so I think that community has to begin to be constructed, and you know, minority people of color exist everywhere. They are not just concentrated in cities or in things like that. So I want to stay here because I know there are a lot of students who sometimes don't know who to go to on campus, and I want to be able to construct that environment and place for them.
So when I as I sort of noted earlier, wasn't really brought up in an environment where questioning was the norm. It was just a lot of, you go to a place, accept what you're told, and that's that, right? And so for me, when I discovered that philosophy was in the business of asking questions and interrogating certain long-held beliefs and ideas, I then soon discovered that I could major in that. And so I was like, are you kidding me? Of course I want to become a philosopher, right? Or, do philosophy. And so that's what initially sparked it, was just, I can occupy this space that I've never really, was foreign to me. Great, let's do it. And where do I want to be in 10 years' time? I'd like to be a professor of philosophy, but that falls out of a more general desire to want to do research and engage interdisciplinarily with other people. So I would say that professor, definitely want to be a professor. I want to be in a position where I can maybe engage with other people in different fields and learn from them, and maybe do something to have something to offer them, and also teach. But again, that falls out of a more general desire to want to do interdisciplinary work and research. So,
Can you be a philosopher outside the academy?
of course,
Yeah.
of course.
And what would you do outside of the academy?
Apply a lot of the principles that I've learned to real-world situations. So I said that a lot of philosophers are biologists. A lot of philosophers are working in different capacities in different environments. So yeah, you don't have to be a philosopher. You don't have to be in the academy. You don't have to go. And that, in my opinion, you can. I mean, I've joked about this before, but I'm like, I'm down to work at Foot Locker and apply my knowledge there if that's what happens, right? Like, I would be more than happy to get you a size 11.5 Kyrie Irving, and be like, hey, let's think about the ethical implications of the leather that's on that shoe. Just kidding, I'm joking, but that's just to say that that's the more general desire. But yeah, I believe you can be a philosopher anywhere.
All right, well, this was a terrific conversation. Thanks to everybody for being here, and thanks to the three of you. This was really wonderful. We got lots of food, so I hope everyone will stop back there. Again, thank you so much. Next semester we'll have a new exhibition in the Haricombe Gallery. We'll be having KU scholars and partners addressing voting rights, which is on everyone's mind. So please keep an eye out to library social media and see when those events are taking place. Again, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.